Hey everyone, so in this video we're going to talk about taking notes. This is a skill set that's often neglected in high school, and then it becomes a bit of a problem when you start going to college. I hear from a lot of college students that the first term of college is pretty difficult because they never really learned how to take notes, and so they're trying to learn on the fly as the instructor's talking, and they never really get it down until they finish their first year of college. So it can be really tough for them to take effective notes and study for their tests, and so consequently the first year can be tough. So my hope is that by watching this video you'll have an idea of how to take some notes, and hopefully you can start developing that skill now. So if you are in college you can get a jump start on it, or if you're in high school you'll have a chance to actually practice before you get to college, because the further you get in college the more important it becomes. So what we're going to do is talk about Cornell Notes, which is a form of note taking. It's pretty effective. We're going to talk about how to take text notes or notes from a textbook. We're going to talk about how to take notes from some kind of discussion, and we're going to talk more specifically about how to study with those notes. So first of all, why take notes? What is the point? Some people do it, some people don't, but it has been shown that note-taking does stimulate critical thinking skills. And it helps you remember what is said in class. There's been a lot of studies on it, and there is a tie between writing things down and memory. And finally, a good set of notes can help you work on assignments and prepare for tests outside of the classroom. Otherwise, you're going to be relying on your memory. Maybe your memory is great, but a good set of notes can really help you in a lot of situations, especially if you're taking a big course load. So I highly recommend that if you don't take notes, you at least try it for a couple of terms and see how it works for you. And if you do take notes, then hopefully you can improve and become more efficient on taking those notes, because you do have to split your attention between writing the note and listening. So if you're a really good note taker, you can do those things at the same time. Good notes allow you to help each other problem solve. You see this a lot where students will trade notes with each other because different people hear different things at different times. But good notes also help you organize and process data and information, and they help you recall and retain the information. So really, just the act of writing itself has been proven to help with memory. And it's pretty interesting when you look at other people's notes. You'll see that they heard something totally different than you, and when you have a chance to share notes with each other, you'll get a bigger, more complete picture of what the lecture was actually about. So that's a good strategy also. So Cornell Notes, let's talk about that. First of all, it was developed in 1949 at Cornell University by a guy named Walter Pock. It was designed in response to a frustration over student test scores, and it's meant to be easily used as a test study guide. So most major law schools suggest using Cornell Notes. Maybe the high school you're going to, if you are in high school, has shown you how to use Cornell Notes. It is a pretty effective method of note taking, and I'm going to show you how to do it, and then we're going to talk about how you can use it. So first of all, what goes where? Well, you've got a page, so you're going to draw a line down the center of your page, and on the right hand side, that's where the notes from the class go. If you've taken notes just on a line note paper, this is where you put those notes. On the left hand side, this is a little bit different. This is where you write questions or subtitles or anything that you want to explore further about what you've written in the right hand side. That goes on the left hand side, and this is where the critical thinking aspect of it is really developed. Finally, at the end of the notes, there's a 3 to 4 sentence summary, and that goes on the bottom of the last page of notes, and I'll show you some examples of that. So it's not on the bottom of every page, but it's on the bottom of the last page. And of course, don't forget your heading, your name, class, period, date, topic. When you're taking multiple classes, this will come in handy. I wrote some notes once for several classes, and I didn't include the heading, and then I had some trouble actually figuring out what went with what, and I spent a lot of time trying to sort it back out. So do yourself a favor and write that at the top at the beginning. Okay, so first of all, you're going to have about a 2.5 inch margin. Draw your line down the paper, leave about 2 to 3 inches on the left hand side. Put your name and the class title up in the corner. Write the topic of either of the lecture of the course, whatever you like. Then you write in your class notes, and the questions and the subtitles go on the left. So that's the basic setup of Cornell Notes. And again, you're going to have a 3 to 4 sentence summary at the bottom. And the summary is going to just essentially summarize so if you take 3 pages of notes, you're going to summarize those 3 pages. You're not going to summarize any particular page. The summary at the end is a way to draw a big picture. So there's a couple of ways that you can do that. You can summarize the sequence of it, or you can try and encapsulate the whole thing. So Cornell Notes are actually best for sequential, orderly lectures. You can use it for other things, but it just depends on the professor. Some professors tend to jump around a lot, in which case you may want to do some kind of web concept map, which is sort of like where you draw bubbles and you just write in stuff and you connect the dots. But most professors generally prepare for their lectures, so there's some kind of sequence to what they're talking about. So Cornell Notes usually work for that. So at the end of the summary at the lecture, you want to definitely write in what you took from the whole thing, and this is really an opportunity for you to synthesize what you learned. It may seem kind of redundant, you're going to feel like you're just rewriting something you've already written, but it really does help kind of lock that information into your mind. Trust me on this, just try it. You'll see that it does work. So let's look at an example. Here you've got a student that's drawn the life cycle of a tick, a cattle tick, and they sort of just basically they just copied what the instructor wrote on the board. So they write that down, and then on the left hand they've got their questions. So if they want to know how the ticks find cattle, whatever strikes them as strange, you're going to write that on the left hand side. And that's going to give you something to look into later, but it's also going to help you think about what you've just written, because when we write notes, we have a tendency to just sort of write verbatim what's being said, and we don't actually think about what's being said. So that's the beauty of this left-hand column, is you have a chance to write in questions. And you can do this during the lecture, or you can do it after. But the point is, it sort of it forces you to think about what you just wrote, and not just take notes for the sake of taking notes, because everyone around you is scratching crazily with their pencils. Sometimes we can fall into that trap where we're just taking notes because we feel like we need to take notes, but we're not thinking about what we're not thinking about what we're writing. We're just taking the notes and thinking, well, I'll study it later. But the thing is, if you don't think about what you're writing when you're writing it, the notes really aren't going to be very helpful to you. So here's an example from economics. You've got someone who's written basically what the key points that the instructor talked about. They've listed some questions that they want to think about on the left-hand side, and then they've got their summary at the bottom. So this is sort of a common Cornell note format. Here's another example from a 9th grade biology note. Same thing. On the left-hand side, you've got terms, definitions, questions. On the right-hand side, you've got what was said, and in the bottom, you've got some kind of summary. And really, I think the bottom is the most important part, because it forces you to synthesize the information that you took in. And that's really where memory and test taking scores or test results are linked. Is if you can synthesize the information, you can do well on a test. If you just have a bunch of fragmented information in your mind, you may or may not do well. You might do okay on a multiple choice, but if you have to give any kind of short answer, you're going to be in some kind of trouble. And one more example from physics. So you can see, whether you know anything about physics or not, the student has written what the instructor was talking about on the right. They've asked some questions. They've sort of come up with some kind of clarifications on the left. And then at the bottom, I couldn't get this onto one page, they've written a summary out. And again, this summary is the most important part. Okay, so that's basically how you would write Cornell notes. So let's talk about how you would use notes. If you don't want to use Cornell, that's fine, but how can you use notes and how can you take notes in different categories? So let's talk about Bloom's taxonomy. You've got knowledge, which is recalling information. You've got comprehension, which is understanding that knowledge. You've got application, which is using the knowledge. You've got analysis, which is the ability to see the relationship between the pieces of knowledge you've collected. You've got synthesis, which is putting them together to make something. And you've got an evaluation, which is a judgment based on the criteria. So it's once you've put it together and you've done something with it, you then have to evaluate whether or not it was effective. So that's Bloom's basic taxonomy. Here's another approach to that. It's called SQ4R. The first part of it is survey, which means overview, quickly scan. Question, establish a purpose. Read, specifically to answer questions. Recite, answer questions with the book closed. Write, I know write doesn't start with the W, but that means take notes. And review at short intervals. Short intervals are really key too, because if you try and study, you'll see people doing this, they'll study for 3 or 4 hours at a stretch. It's proven to not be very effective. It's better to study at short intervals and then take frequent breaks. Okay, so note-taking tips. So for example, if the speaker says, Hippocrates, a Greek who is considered to be the father of modern medicine, was born on the island of Kos in 460 BC, you don't want to try and write that all down. You're going to fall behind. So try and just take the key words. So for example, Hippocrates, who was a Greek, was considered the father of medicine, and he was born on Kos in 460 BC. So you want to really try and abbreviate what you hear, and that will help you keep up with the lecture. So taking text notes, this becomes really important in college because you're going to go to lecture maybe once or twice a week, but you're going to have a lot of text you're going to have to go through. And before the test, you may think, well, I'll read the chapters and then I'll take the test. Before the test, I'll flip through it and I'll review anything I'm not sure about and I'll take the test. Well, it's not going to work that way. You're going to be shocked at how much information you're going to have to go through in books. So it's important to take key notes from the text. And texts are sort of built in a certain way, and we're going to talk about that. If you can clue into the way publishers put textbooks together, that can really help you take notes. So the first thing is, of course, you're going to be assigned a chapter. You need to be an active reader. You don't want to just scan or cram, as some people call it. You have to actually read actively. So what does that mean? That means you're thinking about what you're reading. It means that you consider how the parts relate to the whole, or how the text relates to previous ideas. And it also means that you have to create questions about new words or terms, or question why emphasized points are important. And usually in textbooks that'll be some kind of bold term. At least it's usually that way with science terms. And examine what you've learned from the visual. So all textbooks are going to have pictures, some kind of diagram. Don't just blow past those. They're usually there for a reason. They'll help you, but you have to look at them and examine them and ask yourself questions about what you're looking at. Don't just look at it for some sort of entertainment value or because it takes up a lot of text on the page. Really pay attention to why the publisher put it there. Secondly, be aware of textbook organization. So look for the pattern in elements like chapters, subsections, headings, summary points, graphics. Different publishers put it together differently, but if you flip through a book, you'll start to recognize a pattern for how they're putting things together. And it will become obvious what points they really want you to take away and what points maybe are secondary information. And of course, you need to know where to find the index and the glossary. They're at the back of the book. The index will tell you what page number to find something. So if you have a specific term and you want to find it, go to the index. It's usually alphabetical. Look it up. It'll tell you what page to go to. A glossary is basically just a set of definitions. So it'll tell you keywords and what their definitions are. And use the text style to identify important points. So become familiar with the font, symbols, borders, graphics, colors, anything that highlights main ideas or terms. So usually textbooks will use bold text in any kind of main idea. So if you are going to scan, look for any bold text, and that'll usually draw your attention, and you need to pay attention to it because the textbook manufacturer or the publisher would not have made that bold if they didn't think it was an important point. And usually the instructor will develop their test from the textbook, so you can be pretty sure that if it's bold in the text, it's going to be on the test. And sorry about that. Be alert to the writer's goals. Highlight ideas, references, opinions that seem significant to their point of view. Every textbook has a point of view. It's important to start asking yourself what that is, why that is, and at least don't just consume everything from a textbook without asking yourself the question, what is the publisher trying to get across here? What is their point of view? And if they have an agenda, what is it? And take notes while you're reading. So, you know, some people do this differently. Some people will read first and go back and take the notes. I think you should, if you can save time by taking notes while you're reading. So include headings, key terms, and graphics, and take down only the important ideas. Be brief but be clear, because the notes are what you're going to use to study for the test. You're not going to have time to go back through the text. You're just not, trust me. You're going to want to look at your notes. So you want to be brief but clear and summarize in your own words, because this goes back to the synthesis thing. When you put things in your own words, you generally will increase your comprehension. And you can use symbols to highlight for review. Some people find that useful, some people don't. It just depends on if you're a visual learner or not. Symbols can be helpful. So whatever those symbols are to you, some people like to draw arrows. It depends, but the point here is you really want to work on developing shortcuts for yourself. and use the textbook review questions to develop study questions. So usually at the end of a chapter there will be review questions. Don't just skip past them. Look them over. If you can answer those questions, then that means you have a good comprehension of the chapter and you should do well on the test. And review the textbook notes. So identify the main ideas, fill in details for better understanding. That may require that you look things up. Identify unclear information and or questions. You want to do this before lecture because that gives you an opportunity to ask. Usually the instructor will ask at the beginning of the lecture, does anyone have any questions? That's the time to bring up this sort of thing. And if you've gone through the textbook ahead of time, you'll be able to get those clarifications. It will really help, trust me. And you want to delete unnecessary information. So you're going to be looking at a lot of text. Don't try and capture it all, is really the point there. And finally, review the note organization, add symbols or rewrite. And then, of course, the summary, which is part of Cornell Notes. So discussion notes. Use discussion topics questions to organize your notes. You can use symbols for important ideas. You can include your own responses in your notes. You can develop questions to review later. And you can add references to other material as they come to mind. Some people find discussion notes to be helpful, some people don't. You definitely need to take lecture notes. Discussion will usually come at the end of the lecture. Just experiment with it. If it works for you, cool. If it doesn't, that's fine too. Everybody's different. And then tips for studying with notes. So once you've got your notes, whatever system you've developed for yourself, you're going to have to study from those notes. So the first thing is write. Again, there's a lot of studies that show that the act of writing is tied in with memory. So write summaries of the most important material in the summary or reflection section of your notes. Really, if you can take information and put it into your own words, that is synthesis. You're taking bits of information, you're putting it together, you're restating it, and that's closely tied to memory. So it's very important to write when you're studying for tests. You can even write a quiz for yourself using your notes. You can exchange it with friends and correct. It seems like extra work, and in a way it is, but it will really help, especially with the science tests. And finally, write anticipated test questions. So if an instructor repeats themselves a lot of times, you can be pretty sure that that's going to be on a quiz or a test. So start listening to those sort of things. If you hear them doing it, write it down, and then you can look up the answer. And that's basically, in some ways, people pay a lot of money to get test questions ahead of time, but the instructors will usually tip their hand and show their cards, if you know what I'm saying. So just pay attention to what they're saying. Anytime you hear a repetition of something, it's probably going to be on the test. So write it down, and you actually have an opportunity to write the test yourself. And you'd be shocked how often what you wrote down from the lecture notes will actually sync with the test. And then once you've written all that stuff out, you're going to need to review it. Look over your notes frequently to keep the information and questions still unanswered fresh in your mind. Anytime you get a chance, just flip through it. Some people use index cards. I found that to be really helpful. Anytime you have 30 seconds or a minute when you're standing in line for Starbucks or something, flip through your notes. You'd be surprised how those few seconds will add up. It actually works better than those long-term cramming sessions at the end. Recite information from notes. That works great when you're driving in your car. Just driving down the road, recite the information. Again, it's that repetition that will get it into your mind. And study in a group. Some people find group study to be helpful, some people don't. If you do, exchange notes. That's the simplest thing you can do in a group, and it will really be pretty helpful. And you can use those notes to provide some kind of common ground of material for reference and review. So figure out what the other person knows, figure out what you know, and talk about it. Again, some people study better individually, but if you are going to study in a group, the easiest thing you can do is just switch notes with each other. You don't even need to be in a group to do that. You can just ask your neighbor at lecture if they want to trade notes. Maybe you can make photocopies. It really is pretty helpful. And then if you need to rewrite the notes, sometimes it's helpful to borrow someone else's notes and then rewrite those notes. Once again, I'll say it again, writing and memory are linked. So when you write things down, you have a much better chance of remembering it than if you just read it. And that's basically it. So my YouTube channel is High School Language Arts. I have other videos up. If you found this helpful, thumbs up. Note taking is kind of it's an art form. So you're going to have to practice at it. I kind of blew through this, but really that's because you're going to have to practice yourself and find what works for you. Just remember, write. It's not just about writing down verbatim what the instructor wrote. You have to synthesize the information. So rewrite things in your own words. If I could leave you with one thing, it's that. Rewrite the information in your own words, and you will find your test scores, I can almost guarantee it, your test scores will go up. So I hope that's helpful. Feel free to ask a question. I'm happy to answer it, and thanks for watching.